9 days before the town put my name on a new library wing, my daughter told me to sleep in the garage of the house I had fought decades to keep. 3 days later, my 9-year-old grandson said, "The house is hers now." By the next evening, my lawyer found the recorded deed. My daughter had slipped it into my retirement papers 3 months earlier. She hadn't just taken control of my house. She had planned for me to leave it. My name is Gerald Whitfield. Most people in Cedar Holt call me Jerry, or Mr. Whitfield if they were unlucky enough to end up in my office as a teenager. I spent 34 years as principal of Cedar Holt High. The library ceremony was coming up that Saturday. A small gathering. A plaque, my name carved into something that would outlast me. I'm 71. I bought this house with my first wife, Ellen, the year Claire was born. A modest 3-bedroom on Larchmont Street with a yard that was mostly weeds and good intentions back then. We divorced when Claire was 9. I won't pretend that was anyone's finest hour, or that it was all Ellen's doing, though it's taken me years to admit my share of it. When the settlement came down to who kept the house, I fought for it harder than I've fought for much else. Took out a second mortgage to buy out Ellen's half, because I couldn't stand my daughter losing her school, her street, her bedroom, on top of everything else she was about to lose that year. Ellen moved 2 states away not long after. She remarried within 3 years, built a new life I mostly heard about secondhand, threw cards at Christmas that grew shorter and further apart, until they stopped altogether sometime in Claire's 20s. I don't say this with bitterness anymore. I say it because it matters to what happened later. Claire grew up with a mother who left, and a father who stayed, and for a long time I believed that was the whole of the story worth telling. The garden along the back fence isn't anyone's memorial, and it never needed to be, though I know how these stories usually go. I built those raised beds myself the summer. Claire turned 11, the two of us on our knees in the dirt most Saturdays, her small hands next to my not small enough ones, planting tomatoes she'd then refused to eat for another 6 years out of pure childhood contrariness. It was never about missing anyone. It was about proving something to myself, and maybe to her, though she was too young then to know she was being proven to, that a man could lose half of what he thought his life was going to look like and still build something worth keeping with what remained. My daughter Claire is my only child. She married Tom Reyes 11 years ago, a good man, quiet, works in insurance underwriting, the kind of son-in-law who fixes your gutters without being asked and doesn't say much at Thanksgiving but means every word when he does. They have 2 boys, Eli and Nate, my only grandchildren, and until this spring, Sunday dinner at my house had been the one fixed point in my week I never had to think twice about. It started, the way these things start, small enough to miss. In February, Claire called to say Tom's mother, Diane, had taken a bad fall in her apartment in Millbrook. Nothing broken, but bad enough to shake everyone. On top of losing the apartment itself, a few weeks later, when the building was sold out from under its tenants. Would I mind terribly if she stayed with me for a few weeks while they sorted out a longer-term living situation? Claire and Tom's 2-bedroom townhouse was already tight with both boys, and the steep stairs were hard on Diane after the fall. I have 3 bedrooms and 1 old man in them. Of course I said yes. I'd have said yes to nearly anything Claire asked me that spring, because saying no to my daughter has never come naturally to me, not since the year the 2 of us were the only people left in this house. Diane moved into the guest room the 2nd week of February, with 2 suitcases and a hatbox she never fully unpacked. Like some part of her still believed this was temporary too. She was polite in the particular, careful way of a person who knows she's a guest, thanked me for meals, kept to herself most evenings, asked before she used the good towels, complimented the tomato beds the first week in a way that felt genuine. I didn't mind her. It would be easier to tell this story if I disliked her from the start, and I didn't. What I minded, though I couldn't have named it yet, was how quickly a few weeks turned into a few months, and how the shape of my own house started changing around me without anyone asking my opinion about it. And how, somewhere in those months, my daughter had started calling a woman she'd known for years Maudie, with a warmth in her voice I couldn't remember her ever using, even before the divorce. By late May, Diane had a standing spot at the kitchen table, closer to the window where the morning light came in. the spot that used to be mine. I moved without being asked, the way you do in your own house when you're trying not to make a guest feel unwelcome, and didn't notice until much later that I'd never moved back. That same month, on a Tuesday afternoon in the garden, my legs went out from under me, somewhere between the tomato stakes and the porch steps. I don't remember all of it clearly, which frightens me more in hindsight than it did at the time. I remember kneeling in the dirt one moment and the sky tilting sideways the next. Claire's voice above me, Diane's hands steadying my shoulders while Claire debated calling an ambulance and drove me herself instead, faster than I'd have liked, to the urgent care on Route 9. Dehydration, the doctor said, compounded by a blood pressure medication that needed adjusting. Nothing that would kill me, but enough of a scare that Claire stayed close for the better part of 2 weeks afterward, driving me to follow-ups, sorting my prescriptions into the little daily box, sitting with me some evenings to make sure I ate before bed. I won't pretend I didn't need it. I won't pretend I wasn't grateful for it, either. Grateful in the specific, disarmed way a man gets when his body has just reminded him it won't always do what he tells it to. And his daughter is the one who shows up anyway, every single day, without being asked twice. It was during that same stretch, the second week of June, that Claire brought a folder to the kitchen table and said we might as well get the retirement paperwork organized while we were already dealing with all this. Pension, beneficiary forms, a health directive bill had been after me to update, a stack of routine documents needing signatures in a dozen places. I was still tired in a way I hadn't been before the fall, the kind of tired that makes fine print feel like wading through water, and I signed page after page because my daughter had spent 2 weeks proving, in 100 small ways, that she had my interests at heart, and it never once occurred to me that the proof was also the cover. By then, Claire had started referring to Diane's room instead of the guest room, when I mentioned gently that it might be time to talk about Diane finding her own place. Claire's face did something I hadn't seen it do since she was a teenager. Dad, she has nowhere else to go. You have all this space. Would it kill you to be generous for once? For once. As if I hadn't spent 34 years being generous with other people's children in a building 2 miles from where I was standing. As if this house itself weren't the largest act of generosity I had left to give anyone. I let it go. I told myself it was temporary, the way you tell yourself a lot of things, when the alternative is a fight with your only child. The night everything actually broke was a Thursday in late September, 9 days before the library ceremony. I'd been at a school board dinner, home later than usual, and I found my bedroom door closed, which was unusual, since I never close it. And when I opened it, Diane's things were arranged across my dresser. Her reading glasses on my nightstand, her cardigan on the chair by the window. Claire, I said, finding my daughter in the kitchen, why are Diane's things in my room? Claire didn't look up from the dishes. Her back's been bothering her. The guest bed is too soft. Yours has better support. I told her it was fine. You told her it was fine to move into my bedroom. It's one bed, Dad. You can take the guest room. Or the office. It's not that big a deal. I stood there a long moment in my own kitchen, in the house I'd fought a divorce lawyer and a second mortgage to keep, and felt something come loose in my chest that had been holding steady for months. It is a big deal, Claire. This is my house. She finally turned around, and the look on her face wasn't guilt. It was tired, and underneath the tired, something harder. If you can't share one bedroom for a few weeks, maybe you should just stay somewhere else for a while. There's a garage. There's a couch. I don't know what you want me to say. I have never in my life raised my voice at my daughter. I didn't that night either. I went upstairs, packed a bag with the clothes I'd need for a week, and left through the front door I'd hung myself the year she was born, without another word to anyone in that house. I stopped at the end of the driveway before I got in the car, the way I always do, and looked back once at the garden along the back fence, dark now, the tomato stakes just visible against the porch light. I checked into the Cedar Holt Inn a little after 10. I sat on the edge of a bed that wasn't mine, in a room that smelled like carpet cleaner, and I called the one person I still trusted with something this important. My old friend and lawyer, Bill Aldrich, who'd handled every piece of paper I'd signed since the divorce itself. Bill, I said, when he picked up, sounding half asleep. I need to talk to you about getting someone out of my house. Bill met me at his office the next morning. Coffee in one hand, reading glasses pushed up into what was left of his hair. His office hadn't changed much in the 20 years I'd been coming to it. Same water-stained ceiling tile in the corner. Same framed photo of him shaking hands with a governor nobody remembered anymore. We'd known each other since he was the assistant football coach, and I was a first-year history teacher. 40-some years and a lot of paperwork ago. Walk me through it again, he said, and I did. The fall, the guest room, the slow creep of a few weeks into 7 months, the bedroom, the word garage. She actually said garage. Bill rubbed his eyes. All right, I'll start with a formal 30-day notice for Diane. Certified mail, the works. If she contests it, we'll deal with whatever right she claims then. Just Diane, I said. I'm not sending my daughter a legal notice. I just need the house to feel like mine again. I want to explain something about myself here, because it matters to everything that came after. I have spent 34 years being the person who calms other people's crises down, not the one who escalates his own. A parent screaming about a suspension, a teacher in tears over a difficult class, and my career was built on believing most conflicts, given patience and the right piece of paper at the right time, could be resolved without anyone losing something they couldn't get back. I approached my own daughter the same way, and I have wondered since whether that was wisdom or just a long habit of avoiding a fight I should have had years earlier. Bill drafted the notice for Diane that afternoon, and for 2 days, I let myself believe the worst of it was behind me. A temporary humiliation, a house I'd get back to on my own terms within the month. Then, on the third night, I called home to talk to my grandsons, the way I did most evenings that week, mostly because I needed to hear two voices that had no idea anything was wrong and still wanted to talk to me the same way they always had. Nate, 6, mostly breathed into the phone and asked when I was coming back to make pancakes shaped like dinosaurs. I told him soon. Then Eli got on, 9 years old and full of a school project about the solar system, describing a diorama with a styrofoam Saturn he was very proud of, his voice moving fast the way it does when he's excited about something, and hasn't learned to slow down for the listener. Grandpa, are you still staying at the hotel? For a little while, Bud. Mommy said you don't have to ask before you stay in the garage or anywhere, because the house is hers now. She said we don't need your permission for anything anymore. He said it the way children say things they've heard but haven't examined. Offhand, already moving on to the next thought, already telling me something about a moon of Jupiter he'd forgotten the name of. He had no idea what he was handing me. He was 9. He was repeating something an adult had said in a kitchen he'd walked through at the wrong moment. The way children absorb everything and understand almost none of it, and then say it back to you with the casual confidence of a boy reciting planet facts. I don't remember what I said to him after that. Something about the diorama, I think. Something steady enough that he wouldn't hear anything wrong in my voice. I remember hanging up the phone and sitting on the edge of that in bed for a long time. The television off, the room very quiet, turning 5 words over in my mind, until they didn't sound like anything a 9-year-old should ever have had reason to say to his grandfather. The house is hers now. I did not sleep much that night. In the morning, I called Bill before his office had properly opened. Bill, I need you to do something for me. I need you to go to the county recorder's office and pull every filing on my house. Everything. Going back to June. Jerry, what's this about? I don't know yet. That's why I'm asking. He called me back that evening, and his voice had a different register to it than it had a few days earlier. Careful. The way a doctor sounds before delivering something you didn't ask to hear. Jerry, I need you to come in. Today, if you can. I sat across from him 20 minutes later while he slid a single page across the desk. One of maybe 40 pages I remembered signing back in June, the week Claire brought, the retirement transfer paperwork, to my kitchen table, signed while I was still moving slower than usual, still grateful, still trusting the person handing them to me, more than I'd ever thought to question a document in my life. The page Bill slid across the desk was a recorded deed transferring a present ownership interest to Claire, while preserving my lifetime right to live there. Do you remember signing this? I looked at it a long time. My signature, unmistakably mine, dated in June. I remember signing a stack of papers that week. I was still worn out from the fall. I don't remember this specific page. Bill tapped the document with one finger. You still have the right to live there, Jerry. But Claire now holds an ownership interest you never understood you were giving her. I stared at him. Meaning what? Exactly? Meaning Claire now has authority over decisions involving the property that you believed were still yours alone. Getting that reversed is possible, especially if we can prove you were misled about what you were signing. But until we sort that out, this isn't as simple as sending Diane an eviction notice. He paused. You asked me to check. I wish to God you hadn't had a reason to. I sat in that office for a long while, turning the page over in my hands, as though the other side might explain something the first side hadn't. I thought back to that June afternoon, my body still unsteady, my daughter at my kitchen table with a folder and a pen, patient in the way she'd been patient with me for 2 straight weeks since the fall, checking my blood pressure before she ever mentioned the paperwork I had signed because she'd spent 14 days proving she loved me. And I understood now that a person could do both things at once. Love you and use the love to get something from you. A distinction I hadn't considered until a 9-year-old said 5 words to me over the phone about a diorama. What are my options? I asked Bill, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. Legally, we have options, but we'll need evidence that you were misled about what you were signing. If Claire deliberately buried the transfer among routine paperwork and represented the whole stack as something else, that matters. But practically, Jerry, this is going to have to begin with a conversation with your daughter. I drove back to the Cedar Holt Inn that evening and sat on the edge of that borrowed bed, turning something over that had nothing to do with real estate law. I thought about the version of that June week I'd carried for 3 months, my daughter's kindness after a bad scare, an ordinary stack of paperwork. And I thought about the version I now understood was closer to the truth, that somewhere in those 14 days of tea and blood pressure checks, my daughter had also decided my gratitude was the surest door into a signature she needed. I only understood that night that whatever else this turned out to be, it had not been an accident, and it had not begun with a bedroom in September. It had begun the moment I was too grateful to read carefully. By Wednesday afternoon, the next piece came from a direction I never expected. Monica Alvarez had been a sophomore in my office more times than either of us cared to remember, mostly for skipping third period to sit in her car and draw, and she'd grown up to become my next-door neighbor on Larchmont Street. An art teacher herself now, she caught me in the inn's parking lot, having heard through the Cedar Holt grapevine that something was wrong at the Whitfield house, and asked if I had a few minutes. I wasn't going to say anything, she told me, sitting across from me at the diner 2 blocks from the inn, sliding her phone face up on the table between us. But Claire's been confiding in me for months. A few times, she sent me screenshots of conversations with Diane because she wanted to know if she was overreacting. I kept them. Once I heard you'd left the house, some of what she'd sent me didn't sit right anymore. She showed me screenshots from a conversation between Claire and Diane back in July, the kind of casual, unguarded messages people send when they assume no one outside the conversation will ever read them. Discussion of the paperwork situation, a line from Diane reassuring Claire that he'll come around once it's settled, he always does, and then, buried 3 messages down, a line from Claire that I read 4 times before I let myself believe I'd read it correctly. I don't want to lose another mother, even if she isn't mine by blood. I sat with that sentence for a long time in a diner booth that smelled like burnt coffee. Monica watching me with the gentleness of someone who understood she'd just handed an old man something heavier than she'd meant to. I thought about Ellen, 2 states away, a name Claire hadn't said out loud in my presence in the better part of a decade. I thought about all the ways I had told myself, for 24 years, that I had been enough. The garden, the Sundays, the front door I'd hung the year she was born, and how it had never once occurred to me that a person could grow up with a father who stayed and still carry an old, unhealed fear of being left again by whoever came to feel like a mother. There was one more line in the thread, further down, that caught my eye before Monica pulled the phone back. A message from Diane, addressed to Claire but clearly about someone else. Don't let Tom see all of this. He won't understand. and he'll take his father-in-law's side before he takes yours. That line didn't fully register until I was driving back to the inn that night, turning over the fact that Tom belonged somewhere in this mess I hadn't accounted for, and that whatever role he was playing, his own wife and mother didn't entirely trust him to play it the way they needed. I had 3 days left before the library ceremony, and a decision I couldn't put off much longer. Whether to bring what I now knew to Claire directly and risk the whole thing spilling into public view days before the town honored me, or to sit on it, smile through the ceremony, and deal with my own house afterward like a man with nothing wrong in his life at all. I thought, more than once that week, about how many years I'd spent teaching teenagers that avoiding a hard conversation never actually made it smaller. It only moved the size of it further down the road, where it usually landed on somebody who hadn't done anything to deserve carrying it. I didn't love the idea of being the specific kind of hypocrite who preached that from a podium for 34 years, and then quietly filed it away when it applied to himself. Tom texted me that same evening, before I'd worked out how or whether to reach him myself. "Can we talk? Alone, tonight if possible. Not about the notice. We met at a diner off the county road, vinyl booths, a pie case by the register, far enough from Cedar Holt that neither of us was likely to run into anyone who'd ask questions we weren't ready to answer." Tom was already there when I arrived, coffee untouched in front of him, looking like a man who hadn't slept properly in longer than a few days. "I know about the property transfer," he said, before I'd even sat down. "I found out 3 days ago. Not from Claire. I was pulling our own property records for a refinance and searched Claire's name. Your address came up under her name." He wrapped both hands around the mug without drinking from it. "Mr. Whitfield, I didn't know. I want you to hear that from me directly. I believe you," I said, and found that I meant it. "I've been sitting on this 3 days," Tom said. "I talked to the notary who witnessed it. Small town, he remembered coming to your house in June. He said Claire did most of the talking, and you looked exhausted, but you acknowledged the signature yourself. That part, at least, wasn't a lie. I had just had a health scare, I know. That's what makes it worse, not better." Tom reached into his jacket and set his phone on the table, screen already open to a folder of saved messages. "There's more. I've had suspicions about my mother and Claire for a while. The way they'd go quiet when I walked into a room. So a few weeks back, I started keeping things, screenshots. And one night, I was recording a work note on my phone when Claire took my mother call on speaker. I forgot the recorder was still running. It caught part of their conversation. How long they thought you'd tolerate the bedroom before you either backed down or gave them a reason to use the property transfer against you. I sat very still, letting that settle. You've had this for weeks. I kept telling myself I was reading too much into normal friction, because the alternative was believing my wife and my mother had been working against you, and that's not a thing I wanted to be true. He pressed the heel of his hand against his eyes. I keep going back over the last 11 years, trying to figure out if I missed something. And the honest answer is I think I did, because I wanted to believe my wife and my mother getting close was just a nice thing happening, not a plan. Does Claire know you found the filing? No. I've been careful. I didn't want her to know I was looking until I understood what I was looking at. He finally met my eyes properly for the first time since I'd sat down. "I want to fix this before your ceremony. You've spent 34 years building something in this town, and I'm not going to let my wife and my mother turn the week you finally get honored for it into the week your family fell apart in front of everyone. I want to sit Claire and my mother together, everything in laid out, and I want you there." We settled on Thursday evening, 2 days before the ceremony. Enough time, Tom reasoned, for whatever happened to have a chance of settling before I had to stand at a podium and pretend my whole life was fine. The hours leading up to Thursday evening were some of the strangest of that entire autumn. I finished my speech almost on autopilot that morning, sitting in the inn's breakfast nook writing lines about legacy and the long, patient work of raising up a town's children, while a folder documenting my own daughter's betrayal sat closed on the nightstand upstairs. I met with Bill once more to organize the evidence, the recorded property transfer, the notary's statement, Tom's screenshots, a timeline in careful chronological order. The kind of record I used to require from teachers reporting a serious matter. Bill also drafted, at my request, a one-page rescission agreement Claire could sign voluntarily, so Thursday night didn't have to end in a courtroom unless it absolutely had to. "You're building her an exit," Bill said, sliding the draft across his desk. I told him that was the whole point. I wasn't trying to win a war against my own daughter. I was trying to get my house back with as much of my family still standing afterward as I could manage. Deanne, through all of it, had no idea anything had shifted. Claire had told her only that I was taking some space to think, and Diane left a note on the kitchen counter one afternoon. I heard about it from Tom, asking whether I preferred the peonies or tomatoes, moved further from the fence line come spring, as though she expected to still be tending that garden a season from now. I could understand why Diane was afraid of losing another home without excusing what she'd done to keep this one. She had been welcomed through my door. What I couldn't make peace with was the fact that she and my daughter had mistaken that welcome for permission to take control of the house itself. I called Nate again that week, mostly for pancake talk and the comfort of his breathing into the receiver, and I kept the calls with Eli shorter than usual, guarding him without meaning to from ever knowing what 5 words of his had done to an old man in a hotel room. I understood, working through my speech in that breakfast nook, that some part of what had happened to my house had happened because I'd spent 24 years being the parent who never left, and had never once asked my daughter whether that was enough to undo what her mother's leaving had done to her. I had assumed staying was the whole cure. I was about to learn it hadn't been. Thursday evening, I drove back to my own house for the first time since I'd left, feeling like a stranger approaching a building he used to live in. Tom had asked Claire and Diane to be there for a family conversation, vague enough not to spook anyone. Bill came with me this time, waiting in the car at my request, close enough to be useful, far enough to let this stay a family conversation rather than a legal one, at least at first. Claire opened the door already wary, the particular tightness of someone who suspects a conversation is going to go somewhere she doesn't want it to. Diane was in the living room, settled into the chair that had become unmistakably hers over nearly 8 months. Tom stood near the fireplace, and something in his posture, square, deliberate, a man who'd made a decision and wasn't going to be talked out of it, told me he'd been rehearsing this as hard as I'd been rehearsing my library speech. "What's going on?" Claire asked, looking between the 3 of us. "Tom, you said this was about the ceremony logistics." "It's not about the ceremony," Tom said quietly. "Sit down, Claire." She didn't sit. "Tom, what is this?" He set his phone on the coffee table, the recording already loaded, and pressed play without another word. Claire's own voice filled the room, tinny through the phone speaker but unmistakable, mid-conversation with Diane about timing, about how long I'd hold out in the guest room before I either backed down or gave them grounds to use the property transfer against me. Diane's voice too, agreeing, adding a detail about how the old man's too proud to make a scene in front of the neighbors. He'll just leave quietly if we push it right. Claire's face went the color of the drywall behind her. "Where did you?" she started. "Does it matter where?" Tom's voice had an edge I genuinely never heard from him in 11 years. "It's real, Claire. It's your voice. It's my mother's voice. Planning how to push your own father out of the house he'd spent decades fighting to keep." "Tom, I can explain. It's not what it." "Then explain," he said. "Explain the property transfer. Explain why you buried it inside routine paperwork while Dad was still recovering, and why you never told him what that page actually did." Claire's mouth opened. Nothing came out for a long moment. Diane, to her credit, didn't say anything at all, just sat very still in her chair, hands folded, watching her son the way you watch a bridge you're no longer certain will hold your weight. "I was scared," Claire finally said, her voice small in a way I hadn't heard since she was young enough to be afraid of thunderstorms. "I don't want to lose another mother. I know how that sounds. Mom left when I was 9 and barely called after, and I spent half my life telling myself it didn't matter because I had you, and then Diane came and she was warm. This way I'd genuinely forgotten a mother could be, and I got so scared of losing that feeling again that I stopped being able to see what I was doing to you to keep it. And then you fell, and I was so scared of losing you too, And somewhere in taking care of you, I decided I could also just fix the rest quietly before you noticed. By lying to me, I said, my voice steadier than I expected it to be. By using 2 weeks of real kindness to get me to sign away my own house. And then standing in that kitchen telling me to sleep in the garage. I know how it looks. It doesn't look like anything, Claire. It is what it is. I looked at Diane, who still hadn't spoken. And you helped her plan it. I was helping my son's family, Diane said, finally quiet and unapologetic. There's nothing wrong with wanting security for the people you love. There's everything wrong with getting it by deceiving a man who welcomed you into his home for nearly 8 months, Tom said. And something in the flatness of his voice told me the last of his patience had run out. Mom, I think it's time you found your own place. I'll help you look. I'll help you move, but you can't stay here after this. Diane's composure cracked for the first time, something wounded and furious moving across her face at once. But she didn't argue. She stood, gathered her cardigan from the back of the chair, and left the room without another word, the sound of her packing drifting down from upstairs a few minutes later. Claire was crying now, quietly. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere much older than the thing that triggered it. What happens now? Now the property transfer gets challenged properly. Or you sign this, I said, setting Bill's one-page rescission agreement on the coffee table beside Tom's phone. I'm not here to punish you, Claire. I'm here to get my house back, and to finally understand why my own daughter thought she had to steal it instead of asking for whatever it was she actually needed. I looked at her a long moment. You could have told me you were scared, any of the last 24 years. I might have understood better than you think. I've been scared of the exact same thing since the day your mother drove off. She signed the agreement that night, Bill witnessing it from the doorway without a word, her hand shaking enough that the signature came out smaller than her usual one. Bill told me he'd prepare the deed, transferring Claire's interest back to me, get her signature on it, and handle the recording. Now the two of us are going to need a long time before I trust you with anything again, I told her. Not because I've stopped loving you. Because loving you and trusting you turned out to be two very different things. And I only just learned that the hard way, from a 9-year-old. Of all people, over the phone. She nodded, unable to speak, and I didn't reach for her, not yet, though some part of me wanted to more than I could easily admit. Tom walked me to my car afterward, both of us quiet in the way two men are after they've done something necessary that neither one enjoyed doing. I don't know how to fix what she did, he said. But I know I'm not leaving her over it. I just needed her to know I wasn't going to help her hide from it either. I told him that seemed like exactly the right amount of both, and I meant it. Watching him that evening, I understood he'd inherited none of his own mother's talent for finding comfort at someone else's expense, and I was grateful for it in a way I didn't have adequate words for yet. The library ceremony went ahead 2 days later, under a clear October sky, the new wing's brass plaque catching the afternoon light. I gave my speech, 34 years condensed into 10 minutes. A joke about the contractor who'd helped me pour the driveway back in the 80s. The line about students once convinced their whole lives were over because of one bad semester, and how most of them proved themselves wrong. Monica sat in the third row, sketching in a small notebook the whole time, the way she probably had in my office 30 years earlier. Bill stood near the back with his arms crossed, looking prouder than the occasion strictly called for. Claire and Tom came too, sitting near the front with the boys. Claire's as red-rimmed but present. She didn't try to sit beside me. She understood, I think, that some distances have to be walked back one careful step at a time, not closed in a single afternoon just because a plaque had my name on it. Afterward, once the crowd thinned, Claire came up to me holding a small paper envelope in both hands. Inside were seeds saved from the same heirloom tomato variety we'd grown together. The summer she turned 11. I want to plant these at our place, she said, if that's all right. I want something that's actually ours, that I didn't have to take from you to get. I told her that was all right. I told her it would take a while before I trusted her with anything bigger than a packet of seeds. And she nodded like she'd expected exactly that answer and was relieved to hear it, said plainly instead left to guess at. Ellie tugged my sleeve and asked if the library would have my old history textbooks in it somewhere. And I told him I'd see what I could arrange, and for just a moment, standing beneath my name, carved into the stone above the entrance to the new wing, I let myself believe that whatever came next for my family, it would at least be built on something true. I still keep the garden going along the back fence, the same beds Claire and I dug out together the summer she turned 11. The tomatoes came in strange and late this year, a season behind whatever the rest of the world was doing. I don't mind. Some things are worth growing slowly, on their own schedule, by people who finally stopped pretending the ground beneath them was ever as settled as it looked. I've thought a great deal, in the month since, about how the truest things in a family often come out sideways, through a child too young to know what he's carrying, rather than through anyone brave enough to say them straight. I've learned that loving someone and trusting them are not the same gift, and that a man can spend a whole life giving the first one generously and still have to relearn, late and the hard way, how carefully the second one has to be earned back. If any part of this sounds like your own kitchen table, I'd be glad to hear about it in the comments. And if you're new here, welcome. There's a whole shelf of these stories waiting for you. The people and situations in this account have been reshaped from life into story, offered for reflection rather than as anyone's literal record.